All right. Let's call this meeting to order at 7:30. Roll call. Danny. Here. Peter. Here. Michelle. Here. Leah. Here. Jeff. Leah. Diana. Sorry, Diana.
I'm just going to wait for you.
Here. And Blaine is here as well as myself. Meeting has been properly noticed and certified. Deb, thank you. Let's all stand and say the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Motion to approve the agenda. Second. Peter made the motion and Leah seconded. Any discussion or items people would like to discuss? No? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Item number 3, approval of the April 20th regular and executive session meeting minutes.
Motion approved.
Second. Diana made the motion, Leah seconded. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Abstain.
Jeff abstained. Passed. Addressing the board, school news.
I just have a few items. One is it's Teacher and Staff Appreciation Week, and I know all the buildings, we have some exciting activities going on to honor our staff members who are so devoted to our district. So I know there are a number of you here tonight, so just thank you to all of you for all that you do every day.
Thank you.
A couple other items. One is that we are again hosting camp Invention for the second year in a row, and last year we had over 70 campers for our first year. That will be running at the Primary Center June 22nd through the 26th, and it's pretty much all day. It's open to children from grades 1 through 6. It's kind of expensive, so Christine, I know is here somewhere, Christine has reached out to Chamber to send a message out to if there's people that are willing to donate to help offset some of the costs for families so it's more affordable for more children to attend. She has reached out to get that message out, so hopefully we'll get a lot of campers again, and it will be open to as many as possible that can take part in it. And my last item is that I think most of you probably get the WSB legislative alert. Today we got a message saying that all signs, it's not anything that's definite yet, but all signs are pointing to the governor and legislature restoring the $127 million, which is really the $150 per pupil adjustment aid that we received, so we'll be getting this year, back into school budgets. But like I said, none of that's final yet. But there's been a lot of pressure by administrators, school board members, communities to at least keep funding even for school districts instead of reducing it by $150 per pupil for the upcoming year. So it seems like that is kind of gaining some momentum, so that's some good news for us. That's all I had to share.
That is good news. Thank you.
Yeah. Other school news?
And then I'll continue kind of on what Ms. Klein was talking about. So then AP testing at the high school started today. Today was AP Chemistry and AP Psychology were the big 2 tests that started today, and those are 4.5-hour tests, so a lot of kids are kind of cramming, getting last minute studying done for tests tomorrow and for the next kind of upcoming weeks as well. Kind of off the Teacher Appreciation Week note, the Student Council is going to be providing food to all the teachers and as well as giving a little apple to all the teachers on their desks to thank them for all that they do throughout the high school. DECA just got back from Orlando for the International Career Development Conference. One of the highlights were the opening and closing sessions with about 18,000 other DECA students sitting in the convention center, and one of the notes that people kept saying was it was hot. It was a hot trip, and wearing all the blazers and the pants, it got to be a little much sometimes, but it was a great experience for those who went as well. NHS last 2 weeks ago, I think, had their NHS annual inauguration where they inaugurate new people into the National Honor Society, and it's a great honor for those who do that. So it was a little procession with cake and ice cream and all that good stuff. And then finally, this past Saturday was Mount Horeb High School's prom, kind of a little spring, little, of course, junior prom. So that was a big success, great turnout from both juniors, seniors, and probably one of the better underclassmen turnouts as well for prom. So that's always good to see some good kind of relaxation after some hard work this spring. For athletics, golf is having some great success on the golf course with a win at the Portage Invitational Tournament as well as a second place finish at a Wanakee Invitational Tournament. Girls soccer and baseball both lead the conference currently, and baseball has 5 games this week. So if you're looking to get a little baseball action, this week is the week to do so, as well as girls soccer with a game tomorrow here at home. And then the music department, we're preparing for the big annual band concert with band students from 6th grade all the way up to the high school ages, and that's the one where you cram the gym and you hope that you don't sweat too much during that one, but usually the hottest night of the year is that night. But so that's always great to see. It's a lot of fun to kind of see, especially from a high school perspective, where you kind of see where you started and now where you are. So it's always a good one. That's going to be this Thursday, as well as the 18th, which is the board meeting. So nobody here will be able to participate, but that's going to be the annual spring choir concert.
Great. Thank you, Blaine. Any other school news? Okay, moving on to 4B, citizen comments. Any citizens' comments? Peter?
I'd just like to recognize Ken Cole's dedication. He passed this recently for his service on the board and to the School Board Association.
Thank you. Any other citizens' comments? Ken was a friend and served well. He will be missed. Very special prom, I think, too. Personnel transactions?
I'd like 2 pulled out for exec. 1A, and I don't know if I'm going to say the other one right, but I want to make sure it's 4D19 there was for exec, otherwise I'll move to approve.
Is it 4D19? Oh, sorry.
4D19.
4D19 and 1A.
1A1.
Any others? So motion to approve personnel transaction absent 1A1 and 4D19, which would both be moved to exec session. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Peter made the motion, Diana seconded. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Consent agenda? Do I-
Second.
Leah made the motion, Diana seconded. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes. Item 7A, district curriculum. Was this brought forward by? Peter. You want to talk a little bit about that and introduce us?
Well, so it kind of tailors with the strategic plan. So I guess I'm wondering, I read the strategic plan, so there were some few pieces to see added to that. One would be kind of examples of, one of the benchmarks was our goal should be 65% at X. I don't know where we started, so it's hard to say if that's a marked improvement or if it's not really any beneficial improvement. I guess I'm more curious about how we can make the leap to what our curriculum map is to, so our seniors who are graduating instead of 2015 being prepared for 2015, being prepared down the road. And then in conjunction with that, more talking about curriculum as well as with the strategic plan about how our nutrition plays a part of that and all of our other pieces, whether we need to revamp and look at all of our classrooms, whether the classes are being utilized or maximized to their fullest event, whatever pieces they are, whether we need more TAG teachers or more TAG education, all that sort of stuff. So I guess that's where I kind of want to start the discussion and where we can elevate or how do we find that next evolution.
And some of that was part of our discussion with the strategic plan, the 3 goals. Like the health curriculum would be the nutrition for wellness, and that's part of that. But
Right, because I don't see a map per se, I see a lot of pieces, so I'm wondering if we're developing or where a curriculum map is where we're going to go. I think the strategic plan is one part of that, but I don't see where any guideline to get there.
We talked a little bit actually about it tonight in education in terms of curriculum map. We talked about science and literacy particularly. And actually, I think if we look at the strategic plan for goal 1 about continuous student achievement and high achieving, I think it comes under there. We actually talked about defining it a little more. So I wonder if it makes sense to go to education. Perhaps you could join the you're not on education, sorry, it's too new for me. But I wonder if you might join our next meeting, which would be the June meeting, which is, will be potentially one of Jared's final meetings for a conversation about exactly that, kind of mapping that piece out. One of the things we talked about at the retreat was to have some more definitive timelines. In other words, what do we expect the end of semester 1 of 2015-16, semester 2, semester 1 of 16-17 for the next, several years, instead of having it just be this is the piece. So I think that I can't speak on behalf of everyone else who was at the retreat, but I think the retreat kind of lent itself almost to some of that curriculum mapping in a sense by area. But that being said, I think we could do more work in that and look at that a little more closely.
Oh, yeah, very much so. And globally, our whole picture. Yeah.
Are you okay with it going back to the education committee? Would it go back to wellness in terms of the pieces around?
Well, if the education committee defines the map, there's a lot of pieces that fall under that to move forward. Wellness is one of a lot of these committees would play into that. So.
Yeah. So on the strategic framework that we looked at, or the plans that we looked at, the first 2 pages kind of are that for lack of a better word, umbrella. And then underneath that is how each school kind of supports that piece. Right? So what does that curriculum look like for literacy, but then what does it look like for the 4K program, the ELC, PC, the IC, all the way up to the high school?
Oh, and I get all that, yeah, but it's, knowing where we started, where our pieces are, where we can go, what we've achieved already.
Yes.
All those sorts of dominoes.
So I think we're thinking in the same way. It's just how that work's going to get done will take some time for us to put those pieces together, and I feel like we have some of those pieces now. It's just coordinating it and having it look more aligned is what I'm hearing you say.
Yes, we need a master.
Yeah, a curriculum map.
Although I think Peter brings up a good point where we started. I think that's a piece of data that we're missing. I'd like to know where we're starting from, and how, you can't judge where you're going unless you know where you're starting, so.
Because the first number, 65%, seems very low.
Yeah.
But if we started at 20, that's a huge leap.
Right.
But
That
if we
was my
started at
question.
64, 65 is something else shouldn't settle for.
Didn't we get some of that when we had the retreat, we were at the church?
yeah, that was.
We got a
The
lot of
strategic
it.
plan.
Yeah.
We got a lot of that.
Kind of the
information.
starting
It's not
point.
trackable in there. There's no, when I read the plan that came out, none of that's,
I think it
unless you were at
was,
certain meetings or pieces,
yeah, I
it's
think it was
not.
talked about, but I don't think it was in the documentation.
So I think actually what you're talking about is the actual school plans themselves.
Yeah.
Having
that's part of it.
baseline, right?
Well, that's part of it. It's looking at our curriculum. So
Yeah.
what classes are we offering now? Do we need to offer those? Or do we need to maximize them better?
Yeah.
Do we need to look at nutrition support?
Yeah.
I'll make the argument that we're fortunate, our free and reduced lunch program, our free and reduced lunch is very low, at 11 to 14%. We have a very strong blue-collar, middle-class community. If we lose some of those things, or one-parent work homes, that sort of stuff, we're going to see some huge changes in our numbers. So we need to start planning for some of that stuff. And the curriculum map will lead to those, to really propelling our students. So when Lane is a little blessed, and I use it as an example, when he and his peers or cohorts are entering the workforce in 2015 or college, whatever, reality, we should have educated you for 2020 or 2025. That would be what we should be doing.
And who do you see as the owner of that work?
The director of the curriculum would be that, under Deb's tutelage and under her leadership. Which leads really into the next question under B, sort of maximizing some of our administrators in their roles and limiting some of Deb's overall responsibility. But I would like to see that discussion led, or lead to make an example of our Matt.
Is anybody opposed to moving that work forward? I would like to suggest that those materials that we looked at from the strategic plan include baseline, a line for baseline data. And I think what we've talked about, also just to be transparent with everyone, is that having a one-page document for each school that would be available at registration, that would kind of give you a snapshot of baseline data, goals, did we meet the goal, and where are we going? So that it's very clear to the community as well as to what our priorities and what our goals are for each school within the strategic framework. And we would have one for the district as a framework.
Well, transparency is key. If we have a deficiency, we need community buy-in to shore it up. Or if we're doing really well, it's something to maximize that benefit.
And I think that relying on the school report card is probably not, it's one piece of data, but it's not, shouldn't be the end all.
It's not the end all. And the other important part, which you mentioned there, I think that's very important about our strategic plan and this map, is it needs to be a living document.
Yeah, and not mutually exclusive, right? Right, right. Any other discussion on that? Feel like we have a good direction? Anything else, Peter?
No, that was just really the focus, or at least start the discussion.
And the administrative chain of command, did we address that? I mean, I think we talked a little bit about that.
Well, a little bit, but I would like to see Deb's, we have a very linear structure, with the exception of the one reorganization that occurred this year. The way I would envision, and this is not a new argument for me, but for 4 years running now, in reality, Deb should only be supervising 3 or 4 people. The rest should be broken down. I haven't talked to Deb about this, but should be broken down on the departments. So for example, director of curriculum, all the principals should be reporting to that individual. We've already talked about Scott's position, they reorganized that. HR is whether that's a lateral to business or not, or eventually falls under business is a different question. And then Teresa's role, or whoever fills that role, Teresa's role, the director of that one, really supervises a lot of our psychiatrists, psychologists, all that speech pathologists. But I think it's time we make that leap and kind of give, especially as we look for changing our curriculum act, that would allow our director of curriculum to institute some changes without having to be more lateral, to be more of a hierarchical structure. And I want to give you the strength to be able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, we've had a number of discussions around that.
It's a big change from what we've been doing.
Yeah. It would mean someone else evaluating the principals, and under the new system, I don't know if that's maybe the best route to go, but, you know, it's up for discussion, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, that'll be a big divergent, but in reality, a district of our size, one individual superintendent supervising essentially all the administrators, with the exception of the few changes we made, I don't view it's fair to you, and two, it kind of takes you away from a bigger picture leadership role and maximizing the district's potential.
Is anyone opposed to us putting it as a future agenda item and bringing forward the current structure? Because I don't think we have it really written down anywhere. To my knowledge, we don't. I mean, we've talked about it when Scott moved into that position, but we really don't have it written anywhere, and I guess I would like to bring it back as a future agenda item, if for no other reason. I mean, those of us who were here for the conversation with Scott, but both Michelle and Danny may not be aware of that, so I'd like to bring it back when we can actually have it written down so it's clear who's supervising what and Deb's roles. Is that all right with you, Peter?
Well, that's fine, but I don't want
Put it
to
on the
lose
next
sight of
agenda.
it, because I think...
No, I think we can put it on the second agenda. Is that okay? Second main agenda?
Yeah.
All right, thank you. 15-16 calendar update. And again, this is up for a discussion item, not a voting item?
Actually, the board approved the basic vacations and breaks and everything last year. This fills in open houses, conferences, all of that kind of detail, so. And that's been worked through with admin council and the buildings. And as you know, there's a representative from each building that I met with to really create the basic of that, and we went through that before we started the 16-17 work this year. So it's had a lot of review, I guess I would say, by a lot of different groups, so.
Any comments? Peter?
Much to my children's chagrin, I know there was discussion 18 months ago about going to a calendar or quarter system. Or at least the idea was brought up by a few of the teachers. Is that
Quarter system as far as
year-round and breaking up our breaks differently? Has that ever gone?
year-round school. We have talked about it a little bit informally. Actually, we've talked about it a little bit informally on the calendar group as well. But, with some things, it makes it a little more difficult if we were the only district in the whole area doing that, matching up with different activities, and that it makes it a little bit more difficult. So I don't think we're quite to that point yet, but I know there are a lot of pluses with it.
There's been, a few districts in the state that have gone that way, so that's why.
Not the whole, they only have one school, I think, in La Crosse and in Green Bay. They have like one school building
Kind of
doing
piloting
that.
their program.
Just piloting it, yeah.
Do we see if that, is there any report to superintendents about outcomes for that? Are they even looking at that stuff?
No, we haven't had a lot of discussion just because in our state that hasn't been done too much. They're, like those two districts have piloted it in, specific school buildings. But I think there are a lot of pluses to it. Like I was a special ed teacher, and, you see a lot of, I think a lot of positives with year-round school. More breaks throughout the year instead of one long break. But I think we have a ways to go to get there. That would be a whole community shift in thinking, and would require a lot of, I think, probably meetings with parents and getting input from parents and staff on what, how that might look or how it could work for us, I guess. But we're quite a ways off probably from that, since no other district in the state has done that.
Thank you.
Any other questions about the calendar? The early release, is that the same time, 12:30?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
I know that's been brought up across time about should that be late start, or, there's been different kind of models, but the group that puts this together, the calendar committee, right, I believe, is made up of staff, is that correct?
It's 4 teachers.
And on those early releases, what happens in the afternoon, just for transparency? Is it professional development?
And I think this last year you got a calendar of what was going on in all the buildings during those early release times. This year we spent, because of educator effectiveness, we spent a number of those times doing work on that, but.
Hopefully that's over and done.
Yeah.
Can I ask, has there ever been discussion about, I know Middleton has gone to a full day every other month, I believe, with their, instead of early release, they have a full day every month for professional development.
And actually, when we started working on the 16-17 calendar, which you have further down, we didn't put, we don't have early releases, we just basically have actual full day breaks. But we did discuss talking about doing something different with in-service, whether it's a late start, early release, or doing even something like that. What it would mean to our minutes and hours of instruction, we'd have to look at. But we don't have that necessarily that defined in our 16-17. We just have the kind of the normal breaks put in there, because that we wanted to have some more discussion around that. Look at doing some maybe other items like that.
Okay.
Any other questions about the calendar? I assume that this complies with the DPI. I did not count up the dates to make sure, but I know that was an issue last year.
We no longer really have that 180-day. We still have the hours of instruction, and you almost have to have that many days to get the hours in case you have, which we do always, snow days. Late starts, early releases because of weather, and those things happen, so.
And so how many snow days would we have to have before we'd need to consider extending?
This one, I think, actually has 3 snow days built in, and then the parent-teacher conference is not, it's counted as, it used to be counted as one of your 180 days, but it's not counted as instruction hours, so it counts as another day as not being included in those hours of instruction. So we have 3 built in automatically.
How many do we build in for this year?
We built in, I guess, 3 as well, and then the parent-teacher conference day. And like if we have to have a late start because of weather, then we start figuring out how many minutes of instruction we're getting on each of those days to make sure we're still meeting the requirement, because that is still a major requirement that we have to complete for DPI.
So I wonder about when you have early release, and I think this actually happened once this year, where we didn't have late start because it wasn't early release day, but the weather was bad.
Yes, so we just had canceled because we didn't want to bring kids in late and then send them home in 2 hours.
Right.
That happened.
So, I mean, for that reason, again, I'm not going to make that decision, but I wonder if that could be taken back to the calendar committee for their consideration, that perhaps a late start is a better idea, because then we wouldn't have had that to call an entire day of instruction. Just an idea, just a thought. Any other conversation? No? All right. That concludes the discussion items. Let's move on to the action items. 8A, consideration of future problem-solving international conference in Ames, Iowa. I'm guessing that's why Christine came.
So in April, we were able to bring 5 teams and then 10 individual students to compete for our state tournament for future problem solvers. And Allie Gundrum, a 6th grader, took first place in the junior division while we were there. So out of all of the 4th, 5th, and 6th grade students that were competing as individuals, she won first place, and she is now qualified to attend the international conference this summer. The conference is in Ames, Iowa, international to all of the other countries in the world that are attending, not necessarily to us. June 10th through the 14th. We would actually be planning to go on the 11th, which is Thursday. Wednesday is kind of just a check-in day, and then Thursday is also a check-in day. So the plan would be to go Thursday. Competition would be on Friday. Saturday they have planned like tours and choirs and different activities for the kids to get to know each other and things like that. And then Sunday would be the closing award ceremony. So.
Move to approve.
Do you have any questions that you'd like me to answer, or?
It's great.
Peter made a motion to approve and Diana seconded. I'm just sorry that it's not somewhere more exotic. That actually is international, but.
International conference in Ames.
Yeah. Congratulations, and we're very proud of you. You should be proud of yourself, that's awesome. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Have a great time, and thank you for serving us. Oh. 8B, consideration of fitness center signage. I believe this came up at our last meeting.
Yeah.
Somebody had raised the issue. Deb?
Yep, and I did include in your packet public gifts to schools, because really it involves a donation to a school. It's not advertising. If it's a corporation selling a product, like if Pepsi gave money, would we put a big sign up because it's trying to advertise or encourage people to use their product or a service. In this case, it's a donation. And our donation policy 840, even though it has come up at times, maybe more in connection with the advertising policy, you know, putting Pepsi on our scoreboards and things like that, has been discussed. As far as actually putting out naming rights in our public gifts to schools, we haven't really addressed that in our policy, and it's probably because we haven't had really, really large donations by one or a few people until now, basically. So even though we do have a policy on accepting those gifts, we don't really have a formal way of providing some type of recognition. And I know it came up, the signage at the fitness center outside, and I had been in contact with Joan a little bit and Mike about doing something for recognition for all the donors, and because it's been tremendous. I mean, we have had so many people. We got checks today from donors. We've just had so many people donating towards the equipment and actually, completing the inside facility, which is just phenomenal. So trying to figure out a way to do that and what's the best way to do that. I guess that's kind of where we're at. So I don't know, Joe and Joan, if you want to add anything? And Jane, I didn't even realize you were here, Jane. Okay. So like I said, it really probably hasn't come up in this context because it's really, when we were discussing the advertising policy, it was more dealing with corporations, not individual donors. So this is kind of a unique situation for us. I know we had donors for the auxiliary gym and they are recognized on a plaque, and we had donors for the speaker system and the other gym, and we've had recognition for that. But how to go about really recognizing a very large donor, we really don't have a process in place.
So help me, because I wasn't on the board when the speakers and the donors for the auxiliary gym and the, can either Peter or Jeff, because I think you probably were involved at some capacity, how did that go? Was that board approved, or did it just kind of happen that there was a sign, or how did that work?
I think for the speaker system, Mr. Reckner presented a check to us for the basketball clubs that they run during weekends during the winter, and off of that we got a check for taking care of the speaker system for the high school. For the auxiliary gym, when they were building on in '95, that was an addition that the public paid for to get there. And I think that took less than 6 weeks to come up with that much money to get that gym put there.
And did the board agree to put up, because I think I've seen that signage too, right? Isn't there a sign with the list of donors?
Yeah, it's on the back side of the old weight room wall.
And did that come to the board for approval of that signage?
I would not know about that.
I don't remember.
Because
Do you remember?
that's before my time.
Okay.
Jackie, do you know?
I have to think about that.
Well, and the reason I'm asking is, so there has been conversation about a sign on the fitness center, right? At least 3 board meetings, there was conversation about somebody donating a sign, where the sign would go, what it would look like to identify it.
That's just a logo, that's
That was
just
just a sign.
the Viking logo.
Yeah, but my point, there was a conversation, like, there needed to be board approval for that sign, and so I'm trying to understand if there needs to be board approval for all signage on our schools or on our, if that's a precedent that's been set. That's why I'm asking the question. And I don't know, because, like you said, there hasn't been a lot of, the times when there has been donations, it sounds as though there has been some work. So just so that I'm clear, and also to help Michelle and Danny who weren't here, the board has not discussed in any way, shape, or form the sign that is currently on the building. Is that correct? The trainer sign?
Correct. I think at the July 7th board meeting, there was, someone brought up a corporate donation, and then they were talking about advertising. But as far as like doing a specific thing, no.
Okay.
So that's, I think we definitely need to do some recognition in how we go about doing that. But we haven't, it hasn't really been discussed.
Okay.
My question focuses around process, because the original discussion, there was a mention, and it's in the minutes, that there'd be follow-up on the recognition. There wasn't, and then the stone appeared. So for me, the hard part is the process, that we went from going to have a discussion to not having one. That's where my biggest hangup is.
And the stone's been switched.
And the stone's been switched, and it was added. So I guess that's where I'm from. If we would have had a discussion, that would have been one thing, but to kind of come from, we're going to have it, and then we didn't have it, that's where I'm missing the piece. And I would have assumed a change order like that would have gone through our administrative team, and you didn't get a change order request?
No.
Or anything, added request?
No, it wasn't paid for as part of the project or anything, so it wasn't included in that.
But there was also nothing on the original drawings showing that there was going to be a stone in the building.
So that's where I'm the process is where I'm focusing at. And that was never part of the original, the follow through. It was originally mentioned, and it dropped off. So that's where that's where I'm at.
Yeah. And I guess we hadn't really talked about it until, I guess, like Joan sent an email to Mike and I asking about like some recognition, like doing a plaque for all the donors for recognition, and that was in April. And so we were trying to figure out a place and a way to do that because we had so many donors, figure out a way to accommodate all those names and give recognition to everyone. So we were trying to figure out a location for that, but.
I would love to know who these people are. Because I feel badly that they're obviously important to this decision, and I'm not aware of who they are.
Okay.
Hi, Michelle and Danny. I'm Jane Trainer-Smith. I'm the major, I'm the donor, the private donor
Thank you.
of the fitness room.
Thank you. I recognize the name.
What an exciting time for you to join the board. I think that when you come in to a board that has made some strategic changes and that are hopefully embracing different ways of doing things, I just wish you strength and energy to continue working with this group of individuals. So welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Jane, would you like to share kind of what your thoughts are about the conversation that we're having in terms of recognition? And
Sure. Thank you for allowing that. I think, as I've stated before, I'm an educator, and so I approach things a little different than not all of you, but I think that in general, people, when they consider change, they think that they need to identify a situation that needs to have some changes to it, and we're going to talk about it, and we're going to examine how we could go about this and what some are the best solutions. And really, in fact, that's change. It happens very quickly, and you think, what happened, and where do we go from here? And that's what happened when you guys embrace the different, when you embrace the concept as a board of accepting my private donation to combine with your monies to make a better fitness room for our students at the high school. Now, you can decide this, you'll never put this back together, ever. You can't go back to where it was, so that the bylaws and the policies that you had when Dr. Anderson was here, and the policies that you talked, or the signage, or whatever decisions you made with regards to a speaker system, they're different, because we're not talking about, $10,000 on a speaker system. I've invested almost $325,000. And I'm so grateful and honored to be able to do that. But this is very different than a speaker system at the high school. When I brought forward this to the board, and by the way, it was June 2nd that you guys first received my proposal, and here we are, May, and look what we've accomplished in less than a year, almost a year. So I think that, kudos to you guys. When that first came to you guys, the response was thank you, but really no thank you, it's not on our radar. And I was a little surprised by that, because I thought, how does a school district turn away free money, and what would the taxpayers think about that? I thought perhaps that you guys didn't have a vision of how this could happen, and how we could make this work, and how we could make this work quickly. And so we sort of moved forward with that and provided some plans and everything. It was presented then, I believe, at the July 7th school board meeting. And again, there was just discussion about, what are they going to look like? Was it big enough? Should we make it bigger? And it was around July 15th that I received a list of questions, and my brother did as well. I'm sorry. This is my brother, Joe Trainer. He's the project manager for Joe Daniels Construction. My sister, Joan Myler, she has been the head of fundraising, and then, of course, Grandma Fran, my mom. But gosh, now I lost the train of thought.
July 15th.
Thank you. It was July 15th then that we received the list of questions. And the list of questions was for the donor and the family. And all of those questions were nothing that I could answer. It had to be answered by a contractor, which Joe answered. There was one question on there, was whether or not I would like naming rights. And we worked on that. We attempted to work on that, and that was our first discussion. And then it was to come to the board on July 21st. And a member of the fundraising committee, for some reason, contacted Dan and canceled us off of the agenda. And that was where we were supposed to probably have our first discussion about naming rights. I contacted you and Dan on July 24th, and I requested that perhaps because of the scope of this project and the scope of the donation, that maybe we should go into an executive session where we could, talk about all the necessary things that are involved with the donation of that size. That was denied by me. I think Mr. Struby didn't, in the spirit of public forum, you just didn't want that to happen. And I had a right to ask for that, and I had also had a right to receive it, and I was not given that. Then the naming rights just kind of, then Dan and Deb suggested that instead of trying to get, because the executive closed session was denied to me, but let's have a telephone conversation. The telephone conversation was held on July 31st, it's here in my notes, and that's where we discussed naming rights, and I indicated at that time that I would be open to, I would be agreeable to naming rights. Now, I was not told that that wasn't an option for me, but I asked if you would please define what those naming rights were. Are you talking about the outside of the building, you're talking about the inside of the building, you're talking about a plaque, like what are naming rights? Let's define that. And
Jane, can I just stop you for a second, just so that I clarify? That was with Dan and Deb on the phone and you?
yes.
Okay, sorry, I just wanted to clarify for everyone. Thank you, go on.
Yeah. And nobody really knew how to define that, because again, we were faced with a situation that your policy didn't allow naming rights, but you had just embraced this concept for the first time, and therefore that changes the whole game. So we did not want the need to define what naming rights were to interrupt to stop the moving forward of the building, of the construction. And so it was decided that we would pick up this discussion, and some more information needed to be gathered to me, and that we would pick up this discussion. Now, my recall of this is that the discussion was going to be picked up upon the commencement of the building started, not the completion that Dan stated in last week or 2 weeks ago. So that was an error of what he stated, that it was, we're going to talk about it at the completion of the project. I would never, as a business person, agree to discuss benefits if you accept a position at work, and once you start work and you get your salary, you would think, oh, hey, wait a minute, we're going to talk about benefits here. That doesn't work that way. And so, I kind of waited for you guys to get back to me, and it just sort of never came back. I totally appreciated that there are a lot of things, a lot of different things going on at the high school that required a lot of different energies for there, and this was kind of on the back burner, but it just never came back to me. I saw how quickly we were progressing with the building, and I also knew that the mason was going to be beginning at some point. Really what happened there is I had an open discussion with a large group of friends, and I started thinking that perhaps I hadn't heard anything back, that because it was such a complex issue, because it's not a matter of just throwing a sign up on a scoreboard or purchasing a scoreboard, that you're looking for 10 years and sometimes 15 years, because you got to not just have that scoreboard, but you need to make sure you have the funds in place to replace that for repair and all this other stuff. Like it's a very sophisticated process, naming rights are. And I started to think that maybe your school board was not prepared to offer that. And, but yet, that's what I was expecting, and that's what I was told, is that I was told that we would discuss this at a later date. I was never told that it was not allowed. And in this discussion with this big group of friends, we had talked about what I really see as a cornerstone and of a historical stone that indicates this building was an addition in 2015. I read the 2015 as a year that the Mount Horeb Area School District embraced a different way of thinking and embraced a different way of gathering funds to enhance the lives of the students. And then I see Trainer as the family that was very instrumental in making this move forward quickly. I will take full responsibility for that. When it went up and I saw the first stone Trainer, I was as surprised to see a picture of it as Joe was surprised to see his mason pull it out, as the mason was surprised to know that Joe didn't know anything about it. And it was kind of like, whoa. And like, where do we go from here? And it was decided, it's here, let's put it up, and we're going to deal with it. And that's what it is. We got to change, and we'll see what the outcome of this, what the outcome of this is. That was placed on the 10th of February. Nothing was said. Nothing was said to anybody. So Trainer, the first stone really was not historically correct. And I didn't feel that it represented what I wanted it to represent and what it should represent. And I took it upon myself, with my funds, to reorder a new stone. And I did that. Joe was not aware that I did that. And I've got friends in high places, and but that's how that came. And the new stone has since been placed so that it does read historically accurate, and I'm pleased with that. I do recognize that I did not realize actually that there was a policy in place about that. There absolutely should have been. I should know better than that. That I should have had to ask somebody. I didn't know who. But again, it all kind of happened with. I thought Dan had surprised me with it, like Dan Ketterer, because we had talked about, some options. But where do we go with it from here? I don't know. It's your building. You can remove it. You can throw a shrub in front of it, and you can cover it up. You can leave it as is. Whatever the decision is made, I will respect that. But I will say that I do believe that I'm entitled to naming rights. My ego is not caught up in this. If this is something that I'm not going to stand and put a fight about this. I'm not going to jump up and down and scream. I'm just trying to make some. I don't believe that. Naming rights needs to be the Willy Wonka weight room or the Oscar Mayer Wiener football field. I think that the way that I chose to do this is tasteful and subtle And this is a little cornerstone of history, but I realized that this was not within your policy. I'm not quite sure, though, that your policies are still accurate for what you've done by embracing this funds of money. So that's my shtick.
Thank you. I appreciate your giving us that background. A couple of things come to mind. And please know, it is with appreciation for not only you, but the entire community that has raised significant funds to provide this for not only the high school youth, but also the entire community.
I absolutely agree with that, and thank you for bringing that up. And I just want to quickly say that we had a budget of $200,000 to raise funds for the equipment room, and we are, I think, $8,000 short of that. And if we can get that finished, we will have the order and that weight room completed by June 2nd. So we will have completed this whole process in a year. So kudos to my sister and to the, the residents of Mount Horeb and businesses who've really stepped forward. And I think sometimes when you've got something that's very concrete, it's easier for people to give to. So, great.
Yeah, I mean, I am in awe at what can happen when people work together. That being said, one of the jobs of the board, two things come to mind that I want to share. One is that we are each one board member, and Dan was one board member. And each of us cannot speak on behalf of the entire board. And so a decision about naming rights or advertisement or anything of that nature is a full board decision, not a single board member can act on that behalf. That's my understanding, is that everyone else's understanding at the board in terms of legally. So I just want to be clear about that, because there were some things said that I'm not clear about, and I just want to, going forward, want to make sure we're all on the same understanding of that.
I agree with that, and I do respect that. But I ask, please, too, that you must realize that I cannot and I will not be held responsible for the lack of communication among board members.
Oh, absolutely,
Okay,
absolutely.
thank you.
I want to make sure moving forward that we all have that common understanding, especially with new board members, but also for everyone present.
Just to touch on that, though, we can't actually talk to each other outside of this room. Because if more than 3 of us talk to each other, we're now a walking forum and we're
Which is why I
violation.
think that that closed session was necessary to have. I mean, that's what those things are for.
I'll speak to that. Wisconsin state statutes, we weren't allowed to have it to discuss that. So I made that opinion shared, and whether Dan decided to have an executive session or not was his choice.
I'm sorry?
Wisconsin state statutes is very clear what we can have an exec session. And I gave my opinion, that's absolutely correct, that this did not qualify to have under an executive session.
It did qualify, though, Peter. I did check for that. It did qualify, and Dan was aware that it qualified, but it was still denied to me. And that's, when you stop and think about it, that's a pretty big business deal. You know, we're talking about $250,000, and that's where you need to really nail down a lot of that. You know, who does the check out made to? Is it placed in a trust? What happens to the interest of the trust? There are a lot of that needed to be discussed and talked about. And obviously, if I talked to Dan and Deb, and our conversation about that didn't get repeated back, then there's a breakdown in the conversation.
Which happens from time to time.
It does.
So I apologize on behalf of our end for not having that be clear. But what I would like to share moving forward is, go back to your analogy of a broken pencil, and kind of change can happen that way. One of the things that the board works particularly has that focus is to make sure that to every degree possible we are being mindful of how best to move our district forward. You're right, exactly. Change happens like that. Change also can happen gradually over time, so it's not all change happens that way. But we also need to be very clear, and that's why we have policies in place for addressing when there are things that can come up. This would be an example of that.
We don't have a policy on naming rights. It's been brought up several times, and there's several community members that have come to those discussions that are pretty passionate, speaking about whether or not we as a school district should be putting names. And names whether or not they're Pepsi or Coke, or whether or not they're names of people that have spoken to our board, and I know they've come in while I've been on the board. I do believe that we need a policy on this. Now, in the absence of having a policy that specifically defines this particular incident, I think we do need to have some conversation with legal counsel. I agree that it was not on any of the drawings. None of us were aware of it. In terms of it being placed there February 10th, it was brought to my attention by Dan, who had walked past it. I do not walk by the high school or drive by it on a daily basis, so I was not made aware of it, although we had board meetings and I drove right by it. It was also snowy in February, so it's possible I didn't even pay attention, I don't know. But I do think that we need to make sure that we as a district are moving forward in a legal way, and I guess I'd like to have some conversation and some input from legal to see what our next steps are. Other thoughts?
This is a tough one, and for a first board meeting, wow. So I'm going to ask for everybody's help here, because it's a tricky decision and we need to figure out how to make this a win-win. The board feels sort of stuck because if I'm speaking for myself, but hopefully I've got the general feel for the board that we don't want to upset anybody else that might have given contributions in the past or might give contributions in the future and don't get the recognition that they might like. You obviously deserve a lot of recognition. What you did is phenomenal. And I hope that everyone in the village understands that. From my heart, I appreciate it. So what we have to figure out here is how to keep everybody happy. How are we going to do that? So my suggestion, for what it's worth, is that we leave the stone, because you've made a huge commitment. We probably better get a policy in place so that we know what to do the next time, so we don't have a misunderstanding like this. We have to take responsibility for that as a board. But then I would suggest that whoever has given any money to that facility, we get a plaque up there pronto, so that everybody gets whatever recognition they deserve. It's a wonderful thing that the whole village the whole school district has come together. Let's hopefully not get lawyers involved. Let's all shake hands and move forward. This is a great thing. Can we?
I think I speak on behalf of everyone, that it's not necessarily that we feel there shouldn't be naming rights, or that there should be a plaque or not a plaque. I think it's a question of, do we do what was done for the Dream Gym? And I have no idea if anyone donated $250,000 for that gym. It's very possible that they could have donated the equivalent of that. I don't know. There are also possibilities, again, I have no idea, if people have, at what point do you say, oh, yeah, that gets a piece of cement on the outside of the building, that gets a plaque, that gets a tree, that gets it's not a clear-cut, easy answer.
No.
And for those reasons, I'd like to check with legal, specifically around the fact that when this board voted to approve the project, the drawings that were approved did not have that on it. And that's the piece that I want to check with legal about, in terms of, is it okay for us to now change that, and are we okay with that, et cetera, and make sure that we're moving it forward in a way. I don't think anyone's saying that's not a gift that should be recognized. However, I don't know if others donated a significant amount of money and should also be recognized. I don't have that information. We are not shared how much information has been donated. Total dollars we are. But not individual contributions. I've never
Finance
seen
has
a-
been,
Excuse me, we've seen it in finance.
yeah.
individual donations.
Uh-huh.
So, I mean, have some of them.
Equipment, that's for equipment.
Yeah.
But if somebody donated $100,000 for equipment, and then are we at that point of, okay, or $50,000 for equipment, or 20,000, you know, like, at what point do we, and again, it's a very difficult situation, because what we say is $20,000 today is going to be
I need to
50.
add, though, please, that I don't want to come across that, God dang it, you know, I gave this money and I want to have a stone, because that's certainly not my intent. But what I was fearful is that, and this is actually what has happened, is that the conversation was with the superintendent and was with the president of the school board. That information went nowhere, and we were going to end this project and then try to pick up pieces and try to figure out what to do with this. This could go on for a long time. But the discussion that was offered to me is that we would address this at commencement of the project, not at the completion of the project. I took the opportunity and made an executive decision myself about placement of that stone. If it is not something that is desired, if it is breaking policy, then either remove it or cover it up or do whatever you want. You know, like it belongs to you people. But there just seems to be nothing in place about this, and so I just move forward. I know that the board has not supported this with open arms, and I think that Keith Bakken and Dan Ketterher and one other individual who still remains on the board were the only ones that really embraced this. And I think that if I was going to be left to negotiate this with a little bit of some negative Nancy's, it was going to be very difficult for me. And I just chose to move forward with this and kind of ask for forgiveness and move on. But I have no hard feelings over anything. The path to this has been interesting, but it's been exciting, and I look at the end project, and that's what I focus on. And so I want to be clear about that. And I know you talk about that this wasn't presented on the initial drawings. It wasn't, because it was something that evolved through this. There are a lot of windows taken out of the original drawings, interior especially, that, I didn't, for what I thought I was contributing to, the building looks very different than, or the addition looks very different than that we had agreed on. And again, that's just the way it goes, right?
Can I ask, Jane, why didn't you bring the naming thing to the full board? Why did you just go to Deb and Dan?
Deb, and because it was, and Deb, I sent this to you this morning, I just got young, like the email this morning. But I asked for an executive closed session meeting on July 24th, and that was denied to me.
But I'm curious why you didn't want it to go to a public meeting.
Because there's a lot of private, we were dealing with you guys, there was a lot of naysaying. You did not want to do this, like this, and I upped my offer to $250,000. And we had just been canceled by a member on the finance committee, or on the fundraising committee, had for some reason been able to walk in and remove us from the agenda. I live in a different country. I live out of the country, and I was in town for that meeting that got canceled. And so I suggested that we go into a closed session just so we could get this hammered out, because I can't keep flying back and forth all the time. And so that's what that was about. It was Dan that suggested to me that we have a telephone conversation. I've got all the emails here, so there is a paper trail of all that stuff. That's not what I suggested. I was a little confused, and I actually wrote this in an email, that I'm a little confused that we're wanting to talk about this with 3 of us and not a board. But it was my understanding that this was going to be presented to the board. And so that's where I'm saying I can't be held responsible for the lack of communication among members. In that sense, to my knowledge, it was Deb and it was Dan who approached me and said, let's have a telephone conversation about this, because by then I had left and flown back to Canada. So.
Just real quick, as a point of like history, the very first meeting you came to was the first meeting most of us saw it or knew anything about it. So it wasn't that some of us, I'm not speaking for everybody, were not interested in the fitness center. It was that we had no idea until the Friday before the meeting when we got our board packet, and all we had were a few drawings, and that was it. We had no real information. So
I will say that was really surprising to me, because the letter went out June 2nd. And then our first meeting was July 7th. And I remember that there were quite a few of you individuals didn't even know really what the old fitness room looked like. It's like, oh, I don't know, I've never even been over there. And I was thinking, okay, if you were on the agenda, how does that happen that you're not familiar with what we're going to be discussing? But I don't know how all that stuff works. And I tell you, when I watch you people, because I have had reviewed some of the board videos, you know, the attention to wording and process and, you know, the constant changing of policy and everything. I'm glad I'm not doing that.
So can I make a motion that we table this until you can talk with WASB or Board Member Clark or whoever you're going to talk to?
Is there a second to Leah's motion?
I'd just add one comment.
Can you wait 1 second? Can we get a
I'm
second?
sorry.
Who was the second? Danny seconded? Okay, go ahead.
So at the onset,
Do we want to hear, he's a part of the discussion, I believe?
Yeah.
Is that okay? Go ahead, Jeff.
at the very onset of the project, you know, naming rights was brought up. And then a meeting or two later, naming rights was brought up. And the naming rights and the discussion that's supposed to happen about the naming rights, it's kind of like Blue Shear Field, you know, for the City of Madison School District. You know, Madison wants a project. They go out and look for a major donor. And the project cost was $2.5 or $3 million. And Mr. Lucier says, I'll write you a check today, Doug, for $1 million if my name goes up there. And Doug says to him, how many football fields do you want to have in the City of Madison? I mean, that's what we have here. I really think that whether you approve or deny the process of the naming right meeting and discussions that were supposed to happen, you know, it was just a short 2 weeks ago, week and a half ago, that Deb sent me an email and it would beckon me about whatever was discussed or how it is, you know, and stuff, and, you know, about the signage. This really isn't signage. We're not advertising for, you know, a product or trying to get people to drink this or eat this or whatever. This is a donor. And, you know, if Mr. Goodman or, you know, somebody comes in and they hear that Mount Horeb Schools is building a new facility over here and wants to donate $5–10 million, you know, the Frauchis, who knows? You know, the Frauchis, the parents are from the Barnable district. Did they ever go here? I don't know. You know, I think that discussion about that needs to happen.
I agree with you. It needs to happen, but I think that there was a few years ago, I don't even know if I was on the board, but I do remember reading about this,
the American Legion wanted to donate a classroom full of, I believe, for the music department potentially or something, I don't remember.
Florida ELC.
And it was denied, right? Because they wanted a plaque that said American Legion donation inside. I'm one board member, and I have different feelings about that. But it was denied. And so I think without the lack of a policy, we're floating, right? And that's the purpose of our board, is to write policy. We really only do two things as a board. We write policy and we supervise Deb. I mean, that's it. That's all we can do. And so in the absence of having a policy, we need to see what our legal due diligence is, and we need to make sure that we're not violating any legal parts that could put our district at a liability. So I want to make sure of that, which is why we're tabling it, or why that's the motion, I believe, that was put forward. But I also think it's not as simple to say we're just going to put a name on something if somebody gives $250, because like I said, I think we need a policy to make sure. And so let's vote on that policy, but then I also want to address something else. But while that policy is alive, or while that motion is alive, again, to reread the motion.
Just to table it until the next meeting.
Table this discussion until the next meeting when we can have some legal input and ask Boardman and Clark to join us. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? So it will go on the next, you're opposed. Michelle is opposed? Passes 6-1 to be tabled until the next board meeting, which is, to be fair, May 19th, correct? Or May 18th? May 18th. I want to be clear as well that I was the only person, I believe, who voted against the proposal to move forward, and I voted against because I wanted to have 3 bids. It was nothing against the fact of using family, it was because that was our policy. Our policy is to get 3 bids. It's a good policy. The reason we have the policy is because of prior history of not getting 3 bids and feeling like that's just good policy, and it's, I believe, the same policy that Madison Schools has. It's the same policy that several districts have. We have policies for a reason, and when we don't follow them, we put ourselves at liability. So that's why I don't want to say a stickler for policy, but it's my job on the board to make sure we have policy. So we will make sure that we're doing the right thing moving forward, because none of us want our district to be at any sort of legal liability, I'm sure. We can all agree on that and gather around that. And we'll move forward in a way that recognizes the donors to this wonderful facility as they should be appropriately recognized. And hopefully all come together and realize that this is the best for what really matters, which are kids. And I think it's important we kind of keep that at the center of our work, right? You didn't donate this so that we as a school board could have X, Y, or Z. And we didn't approve it so that we could support your family to have X, Y, and Z. We did it for kids, right? Absolutely. And we did it for all the kids of our district. So to keep that, I think, at the center is going to be forward as we move. And I hope this isn't coming off as being disrespectful to your generous donation. I hope it's not being disrespectful to the hundreds of thousands of dollars that have been raised for equipment. But instead, I hope it comes off as doing the right thing, because at the end of the day, that's who we do all of this work for. So I appreciate you coming in today, all of you, and all of you who are working every day with kids. So I'm sure I'm confident we'll get to a good place and a better place, right?
I have
John?
a question. Will you be changing or putting the policy change on a future agenda?
We'll be putting a draft of a policy on a future agenda for first reading. That's something that we will need to have a policy. This decision needs to be made absent of the policy. We can't go back and write a policy and then say, okay, this applies to it. But we do need to get a policy in place. And that will be for Deb to work on. We as a board can direct her to please draft a policy in regard to naming rights moving forward. But that needs to be put on an agenda so that public who have input on that can.
Will that include like corporate money? Or
Yeah.
just donor? Okay, the whole,
Yep.
Okay.
Mary, I'm sorry to add one more thing. I think actually that the fundraising committee has asked weeks ago about some guidelines of what space is being provided so that discussion could begin on how to honor all of the donors, because that certainly is in planning. And trying to get information back has been a very difficult thing.
From the school? Okay.
Is that correct?
Yeah, I haven't heard anything.
Yeah.
So I went ahead and I'm working on a design, but I'll certainly.
And Scott and Stephanie and I kind of looked at space, or maybe it was Scott and Bruce and I, and I think you had originally sent the message to Mike and I, and we were trying to figure out where, I mean, because it's going to be pretty sizable, because we've had so many donors, pretty sizable area needed to do that plaque.
I'm not sure yet, I don't have a design, but I should get that next week.
But I think you have to appreciate that when something like that comes forward to you, and when you're told you need to get back, you still have to move forward with plans. And just like what I did with that stone, and that stone it's not something that, it wasn't a life or death situation, right? If it doesn't work, then you take it off. But you know, when you put out and say that I need some information, and a month later, or in my case, you know, 4 months later, 5 months later, I still hadn't received that information, you do move forward.
I had gotten back to Joan that what we were thinking was like inside, and you had talked about the outside, and we were trying to figure out, and I know we all looked at it, trying to figure out where was the best place for it, but I think maybe we all need to meet and kind of figure out what the design, we kind of looked at some other ones that we have in our building right now for recognition like that, and trying to encompass something that would cover everyone.
When I get the design, I'll let you know.
Okay. And I think one of the areas was the outside area, and I don't know, I know originally we had talked about putting space for the music, and that was one thing that didn't get put in as far as like the actual area added to, you know. Lobby. Yep, in the lobby. Because that was one of the things that had been kind of requested, I think, as an option, was to add space to post items, but. So that might be something in the future, so I don't know if you want to get into that area, but.
We were hoping to put the distinguished alumni materials there.
Okay, on that wall.
So I think if we could have a conversation about that as well, because I think if we start, again, I'll go back to the example of, I think there was, I think it was the American Legion wanted to donate a bunch of materials to school, and we said no to that. And now we're going to be designated. We just need to get consistent. We need a policy on it, A. But also, I would add, at some point, do we have the capacity to be able to post all the donations that we get? And we all know educational funding is in the tanker. I mean, great, WASB is saying now it's coming back somewhat. But we need to get creative. And I am actually all in support of us accepting donations and working together to help our kids. But I also need to be mindful, we only have so much wall space, and do we want our kids going to school in a place that looks like this? Instead of having advertising up, we'd have people's names. So I just think we need to be mindful of that. One of the potential solutions, and we can discuss this further when it's on the agenda, is Verona just recently took down a bunch of signage that had their all-American athletes, and instead put a digital board up, and they're just going to kind of feed on a digital board, so that it's a digital sign. And Ryan is here to talk about the technology that would require. However, it requires this much space, and you can just have a feed and have people donating, going through. It may make more sense than having a wall that big with signage on it. And I'm, again, kind of putting the cart in front of the horse, but I think we should talk about that, because I would be in favor of having a smaller space so that it doesn't. But anyway, we can talk about that when it's on the agenda down the road. Okay, I think that ends the discussion about the signage at this point for tonight, so I'm going to move on to item 8C, which is consideration of 2015-16 fee schedule.
Okay, included in your packet is what is being proposed for, it actually shows you 13-14, the current year, and what is being proposed for next year. There aren't a lot of changes in that. One thing I would point out is lunch prices are being adjusted, and we're kind of in that same position we were in last year. We're still doing catch-up, where we can't have students who are paid getting reimbursed basically for the free and reduced, so we have to keep that at a certain rate under USDA requirements. So we're gradually getting to that point, but instead of doing it in one big jump, we're kind of doing it a little bit at a time.
Any other questions about this?
Can I ask about the field trip fees?
Yeah.
Are those all encompassing for the whole year, all the field trips? Because I know some parents have expressed to me that, you know, you write a check here for this field trip and a check there, it would be easier just to do it all. Beginning of the year, it's done.
Well, I think that is all encompassing. Some people choose, oh, Rachel?
So kindergarten's choosing to do it for the very first time because of that purpose.
Okay.
They've only done 2, but now they're at the point, you know what, let's jump on with what has been going on at first and second grade level, because we are committed to not asking for a dime after that for field trips. So this is the world we live in and our limits that we will live in.
Okay.
And you'll see kindergarten didn't have that before, so they paid as they went.
I did notice that.
So, and it's actually field trip special event fees, so there might be other things that might be included that have a cost to them.
So people coming into the school to do presentations?
Yeah, yeah.
Great.
But otherwise, a lot of things didn't really change. I think maybe the major thing in the lunch prices.
Anybody care to make a motion?
Motion approved.
Second.
Jeff made the motion, Diana seconding. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimous.
Item D, 2016-17 calendar.
Okay, and that, like I said, is just kind of roughed in with the dates of breaks and days that we wouldn't normally have school included. So you can, so that, we like to do that early so parents can use that as a guide when they're making plans for that year. So if they're looking ahead that far, that's quite a distance. It seems like 2016-17, but it'll be here before we know it. And that was worked out with myself and the teachers, and it was shared with the admin team. And like I said, it's basic. It doesn't have some of the, detailed information. It just has general breaks.
And you don't list the early release dates on here?
No.
Can I ask a question then about December? Because I see that you're putting the 21st as a half a day.
Yeah.
Will there be an early release in December in
There
addition
will
to
not
that
be
half
another
day?
one. And that was kind of something we talked about as a group and felt like that would be a good transition so that if families wanted to, they'd have a half a day that last day before break. So if they wanted to use some extra time, but we could still use it as in-service, so that would be our time during that day.
So that would be a staff required day, sorry.
Yeah.
Staff required day in the afternoon.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Diana, I'm sorry.
No, that's all right.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of wondering if this isn't complete, can we vote on this if it's not?
We have. We
Have
did
we? Okay.
for the 15-16, back when we did the 14-15. We approved the skeleton,
Okay.
basically.
I guess I'm not comfortable voting on it until we get those early release days in, because I'd like to have the conversation about flipping the early release to the afternoons based on what I said earlier with winter days.
Would you be willing to at least vote on the vacations and the break days, so that way we have a foundation to move forward? Because we do have families requesting that information. We have families that use that ahead of time for next year already for 15,
The
16.
spring break and the winter break?
Yeah, because they wanted to plan things around that, and so I think it's helpful for them, and then bring back more detail for vote later. But I think it is helpful for them to have an idea of when those major breaks are.
I'll approve that part of it.
I'll second that.
So Jeff made a motion to approve the winter break and the spring break for 2016-17. Diana seconded. Any further discussion on it? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimous, those 2 breaks. And then can you put it on either the next one or June 1, whenever the committee gets back together, for us to look at with the early release days added and the conversation about potentially doing the PM instead of the AM? I'm curious what staff would say in response to that.
People like to know also that October date also. I'm sorry, I should have said something, but.
The 29th and 30th?
The 27th and 28th is being off, there's no school planned.
I'm sorry, I'm
for those
wrong
days.
year. come in that year. I moved up to the other year for a reason, so.
Do you want to amend your motion to do the days off?
Oh, yeah, for October and, yeah.
And like April 14th, we actually, that's a holiday for support staff because it butts up with Easter, and that's a recognized holiday, at least in our current handbook. So some of those, I mean, that we almost have to do then because that's a holiday for them.
Basically, you're approving all the ones that are in blue.
Yeah.
We're approving everything in blue.
So Jeff is amending his motion to approve everything in blue. Diane, are you seconding?
Second, yeah.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so that's passed unanimously. Okay, consideration of 15-16 co-curricular handbook, which I believe is the next thing in our board packet, correct? Are all of the changes listed in yellow and red?
And blue.
And blue, yeah. Blue is kind of a whole new section added.
The very end.
At the end, yeah. We'll kind of,
Well-
before the appendices.
Yeah.
So would it be helpful for either you, Deb, or Mike, or Chris, whoever worked on this, I'm not even sure, to walk through, just for all of our sake, but specifically Michelle and Danny, to kind of give us the foundation of how did you go about these changes? Who was on the committee? How did you write them?
And I guess I can do that. It's good to review that every year, or at least when we had some issues come up and it was, felt like we should be really reviewing that. So Mike got together a group, Peter and Leah were involved from the board. We had Melissa Hansen, because the middle school one mirrors that. It's a much more simplified version of this. And then we had a student advisor, 2 coaches, and 2 parents. And I think that pretty much made up the committee. We had some other sample co-curricular handbooks from some other districts that Mike had shared with us ahead of time to review. And then we had our current one, and we kind of just started going through it. Mike had already, based on recommendations, included some new guidance or some new language in the handbook for us to review already, and then we kind of worked through it from there. I don't know if that's a pretty good, I guess, some summary of the process. So we met twice, kind of probably about 5 weeks in between, so kind of looked at those revisions. We met again and talked through some of those that were kind of like we wanted some more information or more detail. And so that was provided, and we got that ahead of time. We met and kind of finalized. We still had a few things from that second meeting, and then Mike incorporated those and sent them out. So just kind of going through, on page 2, the part in, we've kind of highlighted that what our expectations are, even though it was laid out, it's much more specific now, and really address that participation in all co-curriculars is a privilege, not a right. I want to really stress that, and so that was incorporated really on page 2, much more detail than it had been in the past. And then some language was just kind of cleaned up language, like on page 3, to make sure that agreement that is signed by parents and students is for any school-sponsored activities, to clarify that. And then there's some clarifying language added on page 4 that more about the academic eligibility and how that's defined and when that's reviewed through weekly progress. Then on page 5, suspension from all co-curricular activities is based on specific events that the activity may sponsor or attend. And then there's actually a chart that's now been incorporated that has much more specific detail into it. So when you get to page 8, it also talks about when those, one of the things I think that had come up as a concern was students just joining an activity to basically cover a suspension, even though they wouldn't have normally participated in that. So you can't actually, after an occurrence or you've had a violation, you can't join an activity just to serve basically your suspension. And so that's been addressed in red on page 8. And that they must complete that season
for their suspension to be fulfilled.
So let me understand this. If a basketball player gets caught hosting a drug party, or an alcohol party, or a party where there's alcohol or drugs, they're suspended for 1 year. Is that correct? If you look on page 10,
Correct.
that's what it says.
Yeah, depending on the
If they hosted a
activity.
party with
Yeah.
alcohol, they're suspended for 1 year, right? So if they got suspended November 1st, they would be suspended until November 1st of the following year, of all activities. Okay, and the same thing would be true if they were suspended. So if that happened and it wasn't a party they were hosting, but it was just an offense, right? And it's 25% of the season.
Yeah,
right?
25% of the season.
And that happened the last day of basketball season. Then they were in golf, just as an example. Would they serve that in golf and they'd be able to play basketball again?
No, it's in the sport, I think it says.
Is it in the sport that they are in, is my question.
Well, they aren't eligible to begin an activity after the first practice or rehearsal in order to serve a suspension. So that could still occur. I mean,
So if I'm a basketball player, the last day of basketball season, I get caught and I'm going to have 25% of my season taken away. Why wouldn't I go out for something, a spring sport, that I normally wouldn't go out for, but I might as well go out for it because then I could serve my thing, right? I could become a track athlete, so that way, I've never been in track before, but if I go in, then at least I'll get to play basketball next time. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, and I guess my question would be, how do you determine whether they were or were not going to go out?
Well, but you've set up a system where they should go out, that way they can serve their suspension. And I think that's what the board wanted to.
What we put in here and what we discussed was starting, you have to begin the activity. So we're limiting that opportunity to get caught a week into a spring season, jump out there, go off the sport in order to play the fall. Okay. I don't know that you can determine whether they were going to offer track or golf regardless. I mean, if they go out prior to the season beginning and they start at the first day, I don't know what that, I mean, that would be, I guess, maybe a conversation for you guys to determine how you would handle that when the parent comes forward to say, my son or daughter was going to play this sport and you're not allowing them.
I understand what you're asking, but I think we had some discussion about that in the sentence, students are not eligible to begin an activity after the first practice. It was meant to fill that.
you could not prevent the other because,
So
I
it's,
mean, if
so you're
they're
saying it's.
choosing, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
You couldn't eliminate your penalty by adding a season after that sport.
Right after that started, yeah.
If that, remember from the discussion, that's what it was for.
Yeah.
So my
It was
case
meant-
would still stand the same
Yeah.
way, though?
Yeah.
Right, but it was meant to eliminate the loophole that they could do that. But the parties, if you host a party, you're done for
Yeah, a year.
365 days.
Yeah. Also on page 8, I think we had like percentage of seasons, but we didn't really define what that number was, and that came into question this year. When I called our attorney about something, he said you need to really define that you're rounding up or what you're considering a percentage, and so we have done that. Mike included that on page 8 to cover that. And then page 10, the chart showing, and we did have that separated athletics and activities, what that would look like for violations. Then when you get to page 12 and 13, like we said, the part in blue was added mainly to try to do like restorative practice, so that there are ways that students can do activities, and we can get help for those students that need help. And Teresa has reviewed this, and Carol Nichols has reviewed this as well. She actually helped Mike kind of go through it initially, and then I shared it with Teresa, and she had some other suggestions. So it has been reviewed as far as how that might work. And then really the last change or addition was who's on the appeals council, and that's in red on page 13. So If a decision is made and the family or the student doesn't agree with that, the appeals process is more outlined.
I'll make a motion to approve the co-curricular meeting.
Second.
Leah made the motion, Diana second. Any further discussion?
I have one quick question, which is, it's getting pretty nitpicky, but if a student isn't passing a class, they're pulled out of the co-curricular activities, but is there any requirement for the teachers to be posting their grades more quickly? Because I know on occasion there are teachers that haven't posted grades that would make a change in whether that student could be involved. So I think that there's the potential for students to get punished because the teachers aren't posting grades quickly enough.
Yeah.
Which doesn't, I mean, if you're asking the kids to be good citizens, you darn well better have your teachers be allowing them to do that.
Mike, can you kind of describe how that is checked, like grades, once they're on?
We run, after the 4-week window of time, beginning of the quarter, grade report is run on a Wednesday. If you're missing work there or failing a class, you're on probation for the next week period of time, Monday through Saturday, which alerts you that you're failing a class. If you're still failing on the following Wednesday when the report is run, then you're ineligible for the week after that, Monday through Saturday. We have had in the past similar things to what you're talking about. Student goes in to sit down with the teacher. Nothing is ever cleared unless that teacher sends email confirmation that if the grading had been done by Tuesday, the student would be passing. So from time to time, probably maybe less than half a dozen times in my 5 years here, that has happened.
Can I add a point on Michelle's comment? I know as a student, oftentimes that happens going into a new quarter or a new semester when there's minimal grades in the grade book. And teachers are wrapping up finals and a lot of that stuff's coming down, and when you're starting a new quarter, you have an assignment in, maybe a student chooses not to do the assignment, well now they have an F. And that's kind of where that 4-week leeway period comes in, but the 4 weeks sometimes for teachers, especially after a finals period, starts to eliminate. And I think at that point there's infinite campus for a reason. So the students are able to check their grades and see, I've turned that in, but that's still not in the grade book. There are announcements at the high school probably the week before this list is run, saying, make sure that your grades are eligible. There are so-and-so number of students that are currently failing classes. Make sure that you're eligible to participate in athletic activities, so-and-so. So, yes, it is also teachers' responsibility to be, on top of things while they're grading things, but I think there are enough ways that students are also notified that, they're failing a class or that they should be checking with teachers, especially during that, the first running period where the list is run the first time to make sure that they're, academically eligible.
Thank you.
Peter?
Can you share kind of the follow-up with it was Wanakee or DeForest on the success of the random drug testing and
Yeah,
stuff?
and that came up at a discussion because I think Wanakee is the only school district in our conference, and they've done it for a number of years, does random drug testing with their high school athletes. And I think they found it to work out okay. There's a cost with it, and I think it takes some time. as you know, you were at that meeting. One of the we had two mothers in the group, and one was just so. I mean, she said her daughter would be, she would be upset, and she just did not agree with it. So I think it would be a process that we would have to get a lot of parent involvement and see how people are feeling about it, because just to start doing it, as you could see from that, there's some parents just feel it's a real infringement on privacy and that their children would be very upset about it, and so I think we'd have some work to do, some groundwork to do before we could start doing something like that.
I mean, and to be fair, one mom had the they're polar opposites.
Polar opposites.
One mom was completely in favor with the other one. But as I raised at the meeting, the drug test is one part of it, but what do you do with the information so this can succeed was the better part.
Yeah, yeah.
What does Wanakee do with that step? Do they have something in place, or they?
As far as like assisting the kids that do test
You know, I
positive?
think they have similar, and I would have to ask again, but I think probably similar to what we've drafted there with that, there would be some form of meeting with the people in the student services team. I don't know if it would be a reduction in penalty, but I think there's some steps there for them.
So what was the outcome in the second meeting? Was it more that it was new, or there was the cost, or what?
There was discussion that we felt that we would have to do, have parents get parent input or community input on what their feelings were and have some kind of groundwork laid before we jump into something like that. Just by seeing parents' reaction.
The only, one parent's reaction.
Yeah, I know, but.
The only other question I had was on page 4, and I had asked this at the meeting. Do we need to, or are we to the point where we have to have at least an acceptable GPA outlined? We talk about failing, but we don't actually mark several policies had 1.75 or 2.0, a few of them had 2.2. Are we to the point where we need to think about that, or is that, any other thoughts? I'm in favor of a C average personally, but I guess I don't view a D- as a passing grade, so that's where I'm kind of confused on that. But that's my one sticking point.
But technically it is.
It is, you're absolutely right. And my view is, I don't share the view, but you're right, it absolutely, by definition is. But
I kind of have mixed feelings with that. Some students really struggle to make grades, and this is one way to get them to, if that activity is very important for them to participate in, it's one way to get them to pass.
D-.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, excellent.
Yeah.
Right.
So I see the value in that. And I've said I was a high school special ed teacher, and for a lot of my students, that was something that, they could look forward to wrestling practice all day. And it would keep them really in tune to school and passing. But for them, some of their regular classes, it was very difficult for them to maintain a higher GPA. And so I hate to take some students out of that opportunity that struggle academically, because for a lot of kids, that's one thing that they can do and succeed at. So
I'd also like to give it, to Mike, this is a phenomenal amount of work he put into reviewing all this stuff, so kudos for the improvements in the piece of work. So I'm not opposed to it as it is, but those were two questions that I wanted to at least share.
So there's a motion on the table made by Leah to approve and Diana seconded. Any other discussion items?
Yeah, one more thing here before we kind of end discussion. Kind of echoing Mr. Streby's comment, it's a much more laid out document than it has been in the past, and I think that's going to be extremely clear going into the future and penalties in the future. Reading this as a student, I get a little lost, as I'm going through a 14-page document of relatively fine print text and real kind of nitpicky things. I just get a little lost sometimes. So as we're going forward with a document that if a violation did occur, it's going to be spelled out in here somewhere. How we present the fine print, not the fine print, but the big material and the big points about this document without and getting that main point across without having to go through and read every word for word to the students. The table that is here, I don't know if that's been there in the past. That's extremely helpful, as well as the new table on page 8 and page 10. So if we want to possibly highlight those in a code of conduct meeting, or but a lot of the fine print kind of gets students lost sometimes, and even for myself, I'm struggling to read through the entire thing. So.
Wait, can I ask a question in terms of the old policy, which I think is just online?
Yeah.
Right?
It's, yes, yeah.
Is this, you see this as a significant change from that?
It's huge, yeah.
Yeah.
So that was actually going to be my question after we approved it, is kind of how will this be messaged to students? Because I think the current co-curricular policy is not really messaged to students. It's more that online module that kids see.
Right.
And this is very different than that.
Yes.
And making sure that this is communicated in a way that kids will understand, but also staff will understand, and parents will understand, so that they can enforce it. I think actually the policy is only as good as it's communicated. And I'm not sure that this is the best method. But I think we can approve the policy and then talk about how we're going to do that. Either way, it doesn't matter to me. But I do think we should consider that.
I just have a question under the suspensions for non-athletic things. Are those 30 school days or 30 calendar days? All of the day notations, I don't know if they're calendar days or school days.
Are you in the table?
Yeah, it's in the text and in the table on page 10, but there's text earlier that regards days.
It's a good question.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think it was calendar.
I believe we've actually done calendar days.
I thought it was too.
Presently.
Yeah.
That's what the-
So maybe we can just clarify that.
Clarify that.
So I'll amend my motion to approve it with that change.
To list calendar days.
Yeah. Just
I agree with that. Diana, Leah made the motion, Diana seconded to approve with the addition of calendar days. Thank you, Will. All in favor? Say aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. I would like to have at our next meeting, not this one, an outline, if I could ask so much, as to ask for an outline of how this is going to be communicated to students, to parents, and to staff. I know this is the policy, and if it's just going to be handed in the book, then I think we need to put some messaging around it to address Blaine's question. Is that okay? Is that acceptable to you, Deb? And Mike, is that acceptable to you, Deb?
I will certainly, again, transitioning out, so this is going to be somebody else presenting it, so
Yeah.
I certainly will work with that, yes.
So as long as we get a sense of how do we take this and now make it what it's going to look like for kids so that they understand it. And if it can't happen at the next one, could it happen at the first one in June? Because actually, I would like to have Blaine here, and he won't be here on the 18th, but he will be here on the June meeting, if that's okay. And if people are acceptable with that, can we table that until the June 1 meeting to look at how to message the co-curricular? Is that acceptable? Good, thank you. All right, I think we're all the way up to 8F, second reading of policy on Director of Buildings and Grounds, policy 241.
The policy was, the position description was reviewed with the head custodians, the maintenance people, and then it was also discussed at Buildings and Grounds Committee meeting last week, which Jeff was a part of. And no one really had, I guess, any recommendations for revisions or changes to the policy, which is the position description, that Scott kind of worked on as far as making adjustments to what we needed to cover. The position has been advertised, and we kind of have come up with a timetable to try to hire a replacement. And I did share this with the board, but I'm going to pass around the pay for conference buildings and grounds positions. And like I mentioned last time, some of these, actually a number of them, I think 7 of the 11 maybe that were reported are considered a supervisor or coordinator, which is kind of more than what we were talking about. So the majority of these listed for buildings and grounds at the top of the one page in our conference are similar positions to this, just to give you an idea of what the pay is. We've had, since we've advertised it, Scott, I know you've had a couple people ask you, what does this position pay? And we've kind of just done a range based on where we were at previously. But if the board could give more direction on that and whether the position description seems okay for now to go ahead with the process, I guess.
Anyone want to make a motion on the, it's really policy 241, which is separate of the pay.
Yeah.
Can we do the policy first?
Yeah.
Motion to approve.
Jeff made a motion to approve policy 241. Any second?
Second.
Leah seconded. Any further discussion on 241? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimous. In terms of the rate of pay, I'm not in a position to make that, to have discussion on that until we know who's applying. I can't say the low end or the high end. I don't know what the person's qualifications are to the table. So are you wondering what to post the position as in terms of salary rate, or?
Well, I know the board at the last meeting said that you would discuss salary and benefits tonight. I will say, amongst the inquiries that I've had, obviously most of them ask about that. I told them that it would be addressed, soon. I gave them a range of what I felt our prior person made for salary in terms of when they were here. I said 60 to 70,000 as a range. I wasn't trying to say that that's what that person, a new person would be making, but I also wanted to give them some type of historical reference so they had something to base whether or not they should apply for the position.
Right.
I have a question. Have we ever discussed what pay was going to be before? That's never been something that we've discussed as a board that I recall.
No, it hasn't been normally.
It may come forward when we get to the hiring to approve a hire.
Right.
And then it is part of it. And actually, typically, we talk about pay in executive session. So it seems to me like perhaps we should table it until executive session and have a conversation about it. But that's me personally. Others have feeling about that?
I think we kind of have to, because right now the only thing on our agenda is to discuss the policy.
Yeah.
So I think we have to discuss this in executive session because it fits under what we're talking about under executive session.
Administrator contract.
Yeah, and I don't think we were looking for the board to set, because it really varies, to set a pay amount. But even if we can go with, like Scott's been kind of using 60 to 70 as a guide, and maybe we'll have someone with phenomenal experience, and we'll recommend more, or someone who is, has less experience, and we might recommend less. That's kind of what we have done in the past with other administrative positions, at least that, I've been involved with, which hasn't been a lot, but the ones I have been, we've brought a recommendation to you, but it was more or less just to kind of get a range so that we're not totally off. People come in or are looking to apply, so they have some idea, is this something I'm even interested in? Because if it's way under, they probably would say, forget it, I'm not going to.
I mean, personally, I feel like that's why we pay you.
Okay.
No offense, but it's kind of why, to make that decision, and you guys make that decision and then bring us forward once you're the candidate.
Okay, that's fine.
And we approve the final candidate. But that's I speak as one board member. Are others okay with that, or did they want to get into talking about individual salary rates to ask? I feel like go for it and do what you think is best to man the ship.
Okay, and we'll see who we have come forward.
But thank you.
Yep.
I think we're on 8G, consideration of administrative structure at the high school.
And I had given my recommendation last time, and I really still feel pretty strongly, just because of evaluations that we need to have at least 2 licensed principals at the high school, whether, there are, as Mike can attest, there are some athletic directors that really are, in some of our conference schools, are exclusively athletic directors. It's been kind of valuable for us to have someone who has a principal's license, because they can help with other things, like evaluations. But if they don't, they can't be part of that process. So I'm almost thinking the same thing. We have advertised those positions and see what we get per candidates. If we get a great candidate for athletic director that has their principal's license, great. If we have some good candidates that don't, we would consider those as well. That then we'd have more responsibility on the 2 others, but I guess.
Can I ask, can you give us a little bit of background? I've got little bits and pieces of this particular issue, just for my benefit and probably Michelle's.
Okay.
We currently have had in our high school a principal, an assistant principal, and then activities/assistant principal, activities director/assistant principal, which that's Mike's position. And I did contact, because we have an opening in our assistant principal position, and now, as Mike has indicated, he's going to be leaving as well. So we actually have 2 administrative positions open at the high school. What had traditionally been our assistant principal and what had been our activities director/assistant principal. Those are both open currently. We have advertised the assistant principal position and actually are having interviews that Mary and Peter are part of tomorrow afternoon. So in the meantime, there was some discussion about, do we want to keep that same format? I shared with the board at the last meeting that of the conference schools, everyone has at least 1 principal and 1 assistant principal. We are a smaller school than, or high school than some of them. We are one of the smaller schools, and I think maybe there's one that's smaller, high school in our conference. But many of them have 2 assistant principals in addition to their principal, and then an activities or / assistant principal, depending on the qualifications of that person. So currently, all of the conference schools that replied, and I think there were 11 that replied, have at least a principal, assistant principal, and then activities director, athletic director, and that person may be an assistant principal, but may not be. And like I said, a number of them have 2 assistant principals. Some have 2 of them have an assistant principal and a dean of students, but a dean of students doesn't have a principal's license and can't do evaluations in that. So that's kind of where we're at, trying to figure out what our needs are at the high school and how we can best meet those with our administrative structure.
And as superintendent, you think which structure is the service?
I feel like we should try to maintain the current structure we have, whether, I don't know if, as we look at athletic directors or activities directors candidates, if all of them will have a principal's license, because sometimes you get people who apply who do not have a principal's license. And if we would have someone that would just really be phenomenal and we think would really do a great job in that role but might not have their principal's license, we might consider them still. So it might look a little bit different then, but depending on who the candidates are, that could affect that a little bit, what their strengths are and who we really feel is a great person for that position might affect it a little bit. Kind of like the buildings and grounds, it's like who you get to apply and who you choose might be a little, might kind of change that position a little bit.
Is it appropriate to ask Mike or Stephanie if they have any other thoughts? I imagine Deb has already talked with them. I don't.
Yep. Stephanie probably more than Mike about it, but.
Well, I would like an assistant principal and an assistant athletic
And so that,
with the principal license, because not only would we have a little help with all the evaluations, they also supervise the coaches. And you're on a little bit different playing field when you're equal and you're writing an evaluation of a coach. So when you're in an administrative role, it's not an odd place to be.
so can you be really specific for me so I understand? So you want their principal, an assistant principal who has a principal license, and then an activities director / assistant principal?
Correct.
They have to have that slash, and preferably the principal license. Is that what you're recommending?
Yeah.
So I'm not lost in the details?
And we may, depending on who we have apply for that activity / athletic director, assistant principal, they may have a principal's license, or, we may have a candidate that, a lot of times people apply that would maybe not have that license, but if we feel they're a good candidate otherwise, we might have to look at that. So.
Okay.
Any other questions about the structure? I have a question about the timeline. So interviews are tomorrow. Is your intention to bring that to the board, a recommendation for hire, should that be available after tomorrow, to our next board meeting on 5/18?
We would if it happens, yeah.
If it happens,
yes.
Okay.
We have 4 candidates we're interviewing tomorrow, and if that is the plan.
The timeline is to hopefully get a recommendation.
That would be the plan.
And what is the recommended timeline for the activities director / assistant principal?
We haven't really created that yet because we were kind of waiting to see if the board was okay with us moving forward with that structure, and then we would kind of create more of a timeline. It's advertised, but we haven't really created a timeline. It's open, but.
When is it closed? When is it closed?
We haven't set a time to close yet. Yeah.
Can I ask that we fast track that?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Can we have a recommendation for a committee put together by 5/18, by our next board meeting, so that we know who's going to interview and who's going to do that? It's hiring season in education right now, and I don't want you to lose good candidates, A. And B, if we don't hire somebody with a principal license into that position, then I think we need to think about how many evaluations we do. So the issue at hand is that in order to do evaluations of staff, which are now required under the state using educator effectiveness, you have to have a principal licensure or an administrative licensure. And if we hire someone into that role who has a teacher license, that's not possible. Maybe the best candidate, however. So we just need to think about what that structure may look like. We also need to think about how much time educator effectiveness takes and decide whether or not a dean of students would be appropriate to help with that workload, and that discussion will depend on the other two positions. So still to be determined, but at this point it sounds like we're moving forward going with principal, assistant principal, and AD/AP, because I have not heard anyone say otherwise. So
What is involved in getting a principal's license? Is that
a lot?
It's an advanced degree.
It's not a 2-week process.
No, it's not a 2-week process.
It's quite a process, but, all right. Any other comments on that as we move forward? Thank you for getting that together. I know it's, I'm asking a lot, but I also recognize that the clock's ticking, and I'm hearing about people who are getting hired and that are good candidates, so hopefully we can move it quickly, because we'll have additional hiring to complete, no doubt. All right, where are we? H, consideration of co-curricular hiring and employment.
Okay, this has come to board twice, I think, and the last time there was some discussion that on page 3, kind of trying to combine the professional development. Before it was kind of separated into clinics and professional development and then state tournaments, and there's some feel by the board that maybe they're all kind of part of professional development, so we tried to incorporate that into one statement, but also look at budget implications. So if we're having severe budget issues, though, that might be something that has to go. Just like we have to make any kind of budget decision. So we tried to incorporate that in the language. Chris and I kind of worked on that together, so.
Would anybody like to make a motion to approve?
Second.
Leah made the motion to approve, Peter seconded. Any discussion?
Thank you, I think it's much clearer now.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. 8I, consideration of Pepsi contract.
Yes, you have that in your, Mike provided that for me, so you have it in your board packet. We've used Pepsi, do you have any idea how long?
2001 might be the first contract I have in the drawer.
Okay. So kind of what they provide us, and I guess has been included. Mike had contacted Coke, which is kind of the other major distributor, and they hadn't gotten back to him last time we talked, so we didn't incorporate that. Many of the products that Pepsi offers are things that that are very well received by our students and staff, so we kind of use them. I guess maybe had 2 contracts prior to this with them, so. And haven't really had any problems or issues with them.
So just that we haven't heard back from Coke, or they just didn't want to send it?
And I called, I left a message, I sent an email to, I believe they're actually located in the forest, and I've just gotten no response from them whatsoever. So I'm not really sure what the case is. I don't know if it's not getting to the right person, or no one has responded.
And this is only for sales, then?
This would be concession, and I believe the machines that are in the cafeteria are part of the, there's a water machine out there and a juice machine. I think those are part of this as well.
Isn't the machine that's out in the middle school here? Is
That's-
this also?
They would have, I'm assuming you have your own contract.
You have your own contract? Can I just ask a clarifying question? So do you do the machine that's at the middle school? Like, you take care of that?
No, they stock it.
But I mean, you oversee the contract of that,
Correct.
right? And we don't approve that as a board. Does that go to finance?
No, I haven't in the past, this was news to me, so. You want me to bring a?
No, I'm actually in favor of not bringing it to us. My question is this, like, why do we approve one and why do we not approve another? And actually, my bigger question is, why doesn't all of this go through Scott and finance? Why does it come to the full board? Because it's not, I guess that's just a question that I'm wondering. I have a feeling this is how we've always done it, so that's how we're doing it. And I guess I just want to make sure.
Well, I don't disagree. I guess the one question I'd have on this would be, in conjunction to your question is, do we call around and vet this? You know, is the same contract being offered to Sun Prairie as it is to us, to Wanakee, to Stoughton?
And everybody would have a little different because some of them take the monetary figure back in signage or, we had talked about scoreboards. So what the contract here, and we didn't change it when we looked at the scoreboards before, was direct monetary reimbursement to the district. And this contract is exactly the same as the one we've had prior.
Why wouldn't we have a contract that's district-wide? Why would we have one for the high school and one for the middle school and one for the PC and one for the ELC? I mean, doesn't it make sense to have, wouldn't we get a better deal if we had one for the whole district?
Yeah. Historically, I brought that up. But I don't know, I'm such a small fish in the big pond here. Ours just supplies for the teachers basically, and we don't really turn over the volume that really is there.
But to be fair, like, you have one in the commons area with water and juice, not soda. You have one in the staff lounge. Steve probably has one in his staff lounge. Stephanie has one in her staff lounge. You know what I mean? Like, there's probably one in district office, there's probably, so I guess I would like to ask that this go to Scott and finance and have a conversation about how best to move this forward. And actually, I would suggest that we do that because I'm not sure that it's how we should have our principals be spending their time looking at contracts when you've got a lot of educator effectiveness to do and science curriculum to look at and hiring to do, and so to me, I just wonder if that would make sense. And I guess I'm going to ask Scott if he thinks that makes sense, because he's the one who or Michelle as the food person. I guess I don't care who it goes to, but I would wonder about what you are.
Well,
Can we look at?
and honestly, should we get 3 contracts? So I know you tried Coke, but what about Dr. Pepper? Aren't they part of 7-Up? Aren't they their own branch of soda?
3 bids. I think if you've asked for a bid and if you haven't gotten one that qualifies.
I agree, but there is another group out there. Not that I'm saying we should, I'm just asking.
It might be more interested if it's huger, I don't know.
Yeah,
I have no idea.
I don't know either, but yeah, I would be interested to know why we just don't have one that's district-wide.
Yeah, I don't really know.
I'm gonna guess some of the high school end of it is the concession piece there, which the other buildings don't have.
Right,
Which
yeah.
is a pretty large
Oh, yeah.
piece. That's where all of the monetary advance is coming back.
Yeah.
The machines that they would replace for us over there in the concession areas are larger than, it's not a pop machine that you would go plug a quarter to. It's the huge machine that has all the product in it. I'm assuming that may have been where some of this, I don't know, but this would be the contract. When I came, the contract was just expiring. We re-upped it, and now we're into.
When does this contract expire? I
It
didn't see
actually
that.
expired in February, I believe,
Okay, so we're just kind of on like a.
completing the year.
Yeah. Okay.
So.
So is it something that we can look at soon? I don't know when finance meets next, and how long it's gonna take, but I don't want us to be.
Monday.
Yeah. I don't want us to be without a contract either come.
I mean, is that a realistic ask, Scott, to say?
No, I mean, if you're giving me the opportunity to get involved, I can do that. I just haven't in the past.
So I guess.
I think for uniform,
Yeah.
contract should be going through the business office. I don't know.
Can we get one of these fancy coffee machines somewhere too? I would right now.
Can I take my response back?
And it's not even a staff member who wants the coffee.
I'm just saying.
Okay, so we're going to move that on to, for Scott to consider with finance. If it needs to come back to the full board once you have the 3 bids, or 2 bids, whoever happens to do it, great, but, and then I would ask that just be discussed at admin council, so that all the principals are aware of the fact that we're going to try to make it a more uniform procedure, and if nothing else, somebody who comes to deliver to one of our buildings can deliver to 4 of them, and maybe we'll get some sort of price break. But it's one less thing for principals and buildings to worry about. Is that okay? Thank you. Any further discussion, or can we move on to J? God, we're there. J, policy, first reading, anti-bullying, harassment, intimidation of students and staff, and this was actually discussed at our last meeting, wasn't it? But it's first reading of the policy.
No, it was discussed at wellness.
Oh, wellness, that's right.
Yeah, it was discussed at wellness. It really kind of came from personnel, and Will just left. It came from personnel because staff was concerned about adding something for them dealing with parents or community people. So we recognized that our policy maybe didn't do a great job of that. It was an all-encompassing policy, but maybe we should be a little bit more specific so that they knew that some things were covered that were really spelled out. So that's what we did in that, and it's went through admin council probably twice at least. Safety committee, and it went through wellness at the last wellness committee, and everyone's pretty much on board with it. And really what it does is, like I said, it just kind of spells out adding that information, providing for that, and how administration will help support staff in that regard. And then also breaks the forms out, so the forms actually make more sense now. Because we had one form that tried to cover everything, and now we have one form that's more student-based and one form that's more adult-based. So it's a little easier to maneuver even though we have more involved now. So because some things really didn't make sense on the student form, and some things didn't make sense for parents or for an adult on that form. So it's a little bit more compatible now for those areas.
Questions? Anyone want to make a motion to approve?
Second.
Peter made the motion and Leah seconded.
Since it's first reading, you have to do a roll call vote.
Yeah. Any further discussion before I do a roll call vote? Just so that everyone's on the same page, a roll call vote is needed if it's a first reading of a policy to approve, and it needs to be a unanimous decision in order for us to approve it. Otherwise, policies have to be on the agenda twice, and we need to have a vote on the second time. We're going to move this forward on a first vote because it has already gone through the Wellness Committee and been vetted, and it's a policy that we just looked at, I believe, last year. So, having said that, Diana?
Yes.
Jeff?
Yes.
I'm a yes. Leah?
Yes.
Michelle? Peter?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Unanimously approves, and thank you to the Personnel Committee for their edits. It's excellent edits, excellent additions to the policy. Citizens' comments. Citizens' comments? Future agenda items. I have admin chain of command that we tabled until 5:18 for the high school, I believe. I have, and also for, in general, overview administrative chain of command. That addresses Peter's comment.
I think it was just general.
General. Need for policy on naming rights, which we're going to discuss. To be fair, that may be May 18th, it may be the June meeting, depending on our legal counsel availability. But Deb will let us know that.
Are we discussing the need for it, or will we have an initial policy?
I think that we're discussing what to do around the current situation, and a draft of the policy will need to come to us. So it's kind of a twofold. We'll need a draft of the policy, and we'll need to, unless we do like we just did with a unanimous roll call vote on first reading, we'll probably have feedback and then it'll come back.
And then June 1, I have the co-curricular student, parent, and staff communication plan for the new co-curricular, and that's on June 1, as well as recognizing Blaine for his service, because June 1 will be his last meeting with us. And at the next meeting, if we could have a conversation about the transition to a new student, I know that there's some, Deb had shared with us prior to the meeting starting, when Blaine came in and said this was the second to last meeting, that there's some procedures going on to get a new student representative, and I guess I would just like to hear from those that are working on that so that we're all on the same page with it, and also so that Blaine has an opportunity to have some overlap so he can share his experience and also help us to know what we can do to be better board members and help him really on board. He's been a great addition to these meetings, and if we can continue to kind of have that voice, it'd be fantastic. Any other things for future agenda that people have heard that I did not capture or would like put on the agenda?
The procedure for bringing out the co-curricular handbook.
Yeah, that's on the June 1. Okay. For parents, staff, and students.
Yes, okay.
Any other future agenda items? The other thing I can think of is that for the next one, a recommendation for hiring procedures of the AD slash AP. A timeline, yep. As well as the AP if you have one.
Yep.
So the AP and the AD. I'm just going to say AD instead of ADAP, is that okay? The schedule of next meetings is listed. Does anyone have any question?
Is the regular board meeting on June 1st at 7 or 7:30?
Oh, 7.
So Jackie, the last bullet on 9 is regular board meeting June 1, should be 7 o'clock.
Thank you.
It was a cut and paste probably from tonight.
Yeah.
If there's no questions about that, we will move into consideration of adjourning to a closed session under Wisconsin statute 1985, paren 1 and paren C, E, F, and paren to consider administrative contract, employee leave, employee concerns, and 2014-15 building trades house offer to purchase.
So moved.
Second.
Peter moved, Diana seconded, all in favor say aye.
Aye. Point of order.
You have to roll call.
You have to do roll call.
Thank you. Danny? Peter?
Yes.
Michelle? Leah?
Yep.
Yes.
Jeff?
Yes.
Diana? And I'm a yes. We will take a 5-minute recess and come back at